Well, so I've got a question then. What is the question? So let's say that you didn't want to install a scaling framework. Let's say you wanted to approach it the right way, quote unquote. And instead of installing a bunch of processes, you were going to start at the team level, get the teams working well. Think about how you're organizing around value. So set up teams around business domains or, a flow of valuable problems to be solved. And then as the teams become more effective and start to deliver value, you still have to figure out how to coordinate them because they're going to be working together. So here's, I guess, what I'm saying. We've talked about the idea of value stream mapping and figuring out like what the value stream should be. And this makes total sense to me if it's relatively simple, right? Mm-hmm. Like, yes, we need all of these teams and they're going to like 95% of the stuff they're going to be working on is all on the same solution. So it makes sense to have one agile release train or whatever, and you charter the train and everybody's working on that stuff. What if it's slightly more complicated where, let's say in a smaller organization where you have multiple teams but it's emergent instead of top down. Like let's say you don't have enough work or it doesn't make sense to boot up an entire agile release train. And I guess what I'm getting at is the idea of a value stream versus a value stream network. So some teams working on data, some teams working on security, some teams working on infrastructure, some teams working on, marketing stuff, other stuff. Uh-huh. What if it's a situation where it's not as simple as you can have just a set of teams working on one thing, but like, some of these teams need to work on this stuff for sales and a different subset of teams need to work on this stuff for marketing. And like, how do you incrementally set up I guess really what I want to talk about is value stream networks and how do you figure out what they should look like? Doesn't that it seems way more complicated because the value stream mapping analysis, setting up the agile release train, straightforward to me, right? We've seen that work. But in a situation where you really don't have enough work for one value stream, right? You've got it needs to be focused on different things and different subsets of the stuff. It just, the complexity of it seems to sort of explode in my mind. And so is it just like a number of scrum of scrums is it like, are you organizing around the value at the scrum of scrums level? So the stuff for sales happens in this scrum of scrums and it's whatever teams you need. And the stuff for new product development happens in this scrum of scrums and it's a different set of teams. Like, do you organize around value at the scrum of scrums level? I'm just talking out loud.
This sounds like an oddly specific question.
Well, I think it's fairly common. I've seen it in a number of places. And I think it tends to happen more in smaller organizations, but I wonder if, and also like overall, like I don't know if you call them thought leaders, but I've heard people talk about the evolution from value streams to value stream networks. And I just wonder if that's the next level in non bullshit agile.
So I'm unfamiliar with the value stream network concept.
I am too. That's why I'm talking about it, honestly.
So I'm wondering, when you describe it, where you say some teams working on stuff for sales and some teams working on stuff for marketing, it was my understanding that sales and marketing are parts of a product value stream. They're within the same chunk of organization when you wind it out far enough, right?
Yeah.
So is there really a different, is it just that these teams are focusing on the sales features, these teams are focusing on the marketing features, these teams are working on the development features? Is it possible that's the demarcation where it's really all one value stream?
Could be.
Like, why would you look at sales and marketing as separate value streams?
Yeah, that's actually a bad example. I would say, I would put together sales and marketing as one, right? Because that's the same. But sales and marketing versus operations, for example. Um, I mean,
Okay.
ultimately, you look at it as from the product point of view, right? And then, but what if you don't have enough people to put together separate value streams for operations, or a product that is primarily
Okay.
owned by
So you
operations?
keep coming back to number of people. So what's um because we don't want to get too specific.
Mm-hmm.
Um so you keep coming back to number of people. So what is it about there being a number of people that you're seeing as the barrier here?
Well, I'm thinking about smaller places that I've been to where they don't have. It might make sense to set up a larger release train, but they don't have enough people to do it. Um, I guess I really just want to,
Okay.
and this is not based on any specific experience or things. I'm just thinking about the concept of value stream networks and how that would be different from setting up a value stream where there's one,
All
it's
right,
all
let's
simple and all.
let's rewind down to the simple case then. So maybe the answer is to evolve upward. So what is the simplest case in your estimation? What do you see as the simple case? It would be
Well, the simplest case is one team working on one solution.
okay. So, and where does that solution come from? Like where's the source of that solution?
Where does the
Like
solution?
where's the requester? Where's the
Oh,
where
it could be sales, for example, right? That just needs a report, and there's one team that works on sales stuff. And so,
okay.
yeah.
Why does it have to be a team working on sales stuff though? Why isn't it just a team that can take on work and that work happens to be coming from the sales organization?
Well, I guess it's because you would have enough enough work coming from sales that it justifies the setup of a specific team for it, because there would be
Okay.
certain skills that you'd want to have on that team. A certain set of you've got a flow of valuable problems that come from sales that have to be solved regularly, and so it
Okay.
makes sense to have a capacity to solve that
So the
dedicated team.
trigger point is when you now are seeing so many. So if you started with your one team scenario and you had one backlog that fed that team and anything that the organization needed went into that backlog, and then somebody had to try and make sense out of that, you might start saying, oh, well, we have so many sales stories that we could devote entire sprints to just doing sales. That would be, in my estimation, the point at which you go, well, then we should have a sales team. Like we should have a team that's focusing exclusively on sales because the other stuff is getting drowned out. So before you get there, that's when you realize you've gone too far. Before you get there, you should see the trend coming and you should, demark the teams. And then you would have a sales team and an other stuff team. And then if the other stuff turned out to be the same situation is happening with operations, then you could say we could form an operations team. So you're growing into it. I don't even know when you would start calling it a value stream, though, because a value stream sounds like an entry into a scaling model that should only happen when you have enough interconnectedness between teams to the point where you need a layer above the teams to coordinate what they're doing.
Right. And because you're building one product, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's dedicated to one outcome that has to.
Defining what product is, though. See, a lot of people will go, oh, well, this piece of software is a product and that piece of software is another product. And sometimes they're not. Like you could argue something like Microsoft Word and Excel are both products in their own right, but they're also under the Office suite. So if you're in a situation where you're now doing maintenance on Office and you're not doing major revisions all the time, you probably don't need separate teams to be doing that stuff. There's probably just you could maybe I'm oversimplifying Office, so I apologize for that. But in a different organization, you could get to a point where you just had a maintenance team that was keeping track of all the older stuff, and then you had other teams focusing on the newer stuff. I don't know. I don't know if I've.
Yeah, no, it seems as you're talking. Thank you, Mike. It says your time talking. It seems like there is on the one extreme. There's on the small side, right? One team, one product. On the other extreme, there's one big product or big solution, so it justifies the value stream. In the middle, there might be some weird places you end up where you've got enough work to justify. It makes sense to set up teams that are familiar with these business domains, right? People who are prepared to talk about sales and operations and whatever. But what the organization needs is, there's one product that is mostly sales, right? And there's one product that's mostly operations. There's one product that's something else, and it's not. There's not enough work to set up, dedicated groups. So in other words, what you're going to have to run through, I guess what you do is you set up teams that have familiarity with the different domains, and then the different things you can run through that one system.
See, I like that a little bit better, where your teams are still cross capable, right?
Oh, yes.
And right. And then what you're doing then is based on the needs of the organization. If there's more focus on this quarter, we're focusing on this sales initiative. And that means we're going to be sending a lot of stuff into the pipeline, and that's going to wind up going to multiple teams. And now we have a situation where multiple teams are needing to work in the same space where they could potentially get in each other's way. That creates a need to have coordination,
Right,
to handle collisions, to handle things getting into each other's way, to handle deliveries across the streams. Wrong word, across the teams.
yeah,
Right. So then you would have something like a scrum of scrums, whatever you call it, a coordination meeting, where somehow during planning, we identify that there are teams that could get in each other's way. So we forecast that potential through the planning process. And then we say, that means we're going to need to pull the trigger on this coordination activity, whatever, and then choose a frequency. How much collision are we looking for? How frequently do we think they're going to need to get together? And then we can look at it from that standpoint. And maybe we say in this sprint, we're going to meet every other day because there's a lot of opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Or we'll meet at the midpoint and we'll just check our progress. We could have a very light touch coordination. So that's kind of where if I think about evolving upwards, that's the way the evolution tends to happen. It evolves out of need. When I see the framework or the value stream coming down the other way, I see people trying to plug, we have a value stream. Therefore, we need to have this structure. And in that structure, we need to have these coordination meetings that are going to happen whether we need them or not, because that's what the structure demands. And then we got all these individual teams that never actually have to talk to each other, that come in a very disinterested way to those coordination meetings, and they're viewed as non-valuable. So somewhere in between, right? There's a there. I'm going to stop because it looks like Jeff wants to say something.
No, I mean, and Mike, you just conveyed what's been going on in my mind here. The issue that I see with something that's pre-built and that's scaled, whether it's Scrum at scale or safe or whatever, these are pre-built frameworks, and trying to impose a pre-built framework on a team or on a set of teams in a particular situation that may not warrant that yet. They haven't grown into it. To Mike's point, if you're evolving up, you add water where you need water versus here, you got a big tank of water. Not
totally.
Tank of water.
Yeah.
Big tank of water here. And then what happens is it seems that, especially in the small to mid-sized organizations, there's this desire to, we got to fill that. And we need a person for that role. You're adding layers, you're adding bureaucracy, you're adding stuff. And you should only be adding and building what is needed at the time.
Yeah. And I don't think anybody is truly comfortable with the notion that your bureaucracy is emergent. It's
Hey,
the
that's a
minimum viable
term.
bureaucracy. Emergent bureaucracy.
That sounds like a contradiction in terms. Bureaucracy is the thing that gets set up, and whether you need it or not.
Well,
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, emergent governance. I don't know what you want to call it,
Yeah.
but
This is exactly the point I'm getting. Like, you should only have the minimum admin
there's a
overhead.
minimum viable bureaucracy somewhere in.
I like that term. Yeah.
I didn't coin it. There is somebody else's term, and I'm trying to remember which thing has it.
I think it's Southern.
So, yeah, and I mean, there's aspects of Scrum at Scale that I think fit this notion very well, unless you make the mistake of looking at the big picture the way that people look at the safe big picture, and they say, "Oh, I need to build the big picture." And I think, and you need to look at it with a little bit more of a critical eye and say, this is where the pieces would go if I need all the pieces. But if I don't need the pieces, don't look there. Like, you don't need to fill the hole.
Yeah, I guess what I'm saying, like, and it is a kind of a, I don't know if it's a particular case. I think it's a function of the size of the org, like you said. But in a situation where you've got enough people to create teams where you've got viable teams that it can be focused on business domains, but not enough so that you would have dedicated value streams for individual products, you could set up a network, a set of teams that have business knowledge about domains, but then run multiple product streams through them, right? As opposed to having, if the whole thing gets bigger, then you might have to break it out into separate. But it's sort of a Goldilocks zone that I think I've seen a lot of organizations struggle with, because it's like, you can't just do a value stream, you can't just have individual teams, you have to have some sets of teams coordinating on certain things, and it's all just sort of like sections of the backlog for the whole team of teams. Right. Yeah. This set of team. And that's a terrible, like, at the team level, that's a terrible, like, you don't want to be sitting in the backlog grooming or refinement for a Scrum team and being like, okay, for these 3 stories in this backlog, you 3 people on the team are going to do this. And for these set of stories, you 3 people on the same team are going to do this. You're siloing at the team level. And I'm wondering if I see that same pattern at the team of teams level. Does that make sense?
It does sound a little like that. Like, I can hear this situation that you're describing getting to the point where they're one of those teams is getting all of a certain type of work, and then they're suffering the multitasking penalty just because their attention is divided across all these different ways. There's very disparate activities, even though it's like, I'm the database guy, so I'm doing the database for this thing, and I'm doing the database for that thing, and I'm doing the database for this other thing. And they're all different thought processes, and they're all different coordination processes. And yet, because I'm the database team, I have to do it all.
And if I get sick, everything else stops. Everything stops.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas I think that in that situation, if there was 3 products that needed 3 different, like, wouldn't it be better to have the cross functionality of them as 3 different team events, not 1 team, 3 events?
Unless there was some cross-cutting concern, like maybe data or security or something, where it doesn't make sense, either from a risk perspective or from an efficiency perspective. It doesn't make sense for everybody to roll their own data warehouse or to roll their own security. Like, you need
right. You wouldn't go that far. There would still be a database architecture
committee
level above
COP,
that, right?
Yeah,
something
governance.
Like that. Yeah. So the thing that I'm trying to be mindful of is, we can sit here and blue sky all we want about the perfect structure or the perfect way to do this, and agree that the perfect way is to build it on the fly and figure out what you need and do what you need, right? Yeah. So you couldn't install a answer. You have to figure out where they are and adapt accordingly. Now, the problem is that we don't get perfectly malleable teams. The when I described the thing earlier, I said if you had cross-capable teams where the teams could take on any of those tasks, or any of those roles. Like, we could do some database work, we could do sales work, we could do marketing work, we could do the other stuff. but this sprint we're focusing on this stuff, right? Organizations don't build that way. Organizations tend to build based more on silos. They build more based on their communication pathways, their reporting structures. So you end up more with what you were describing. You have your database team, you have your architecture team, you have your front end team, you have your other thing. And then somebody makes sense out of that by saying, well, it's all right. We can treat them all like separate teams and separate. And I think the problem is that's all right is rather than saying we acknowledge that that's the situation and it's not ideal, but we're going to deal with that. If you want to use your scaling framework as a way of saying this gives us at least some way we can get a handle on it and keep an eye on the threads. But if that's not the ideal answer, why would we want to keep it in that structure? Why do we want to lock it into a suboptimal performance mode?
Yeah,
or even introduce that, because I think when you pose the question, initially, what I thought I heard, and I could be wrong, what I thought I heard was, you've got a team doing, sales and marketing. You got it, and that immediately raises a red flag of siloism. And even if the intent is good, it could devolve into a siloism, because that approach, if it begins to work for them in some form or fashion, they will settle on that, and then it does become a silo with more solid walls.
Yeah.
And that's the antithesis of what we want, right?
Yeah.
So
because then you've shut down the capability of the organization to pivot if one of those teams gets overwhelmed. The other silos don't know that area, so they can't help. Right.
Everybody gets COVID on the sales team.
Yeah. Then you get into this nonsense where they start going, well, we'll pluck one person out of team A and plug them into team B because they saw a database once, and team B needs more help. Now we've broken two teams.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, siloism, obviously not a word.
Oh, no, it is now. I'm going to
innovating the English language since what? 2021
April or so.
I don't have the imagination to make something like that up, honestly. I steal from everybody.
So now I'm going to have to go look up what silos. But maybe I have misunderstood what function means in this kind. I think of function as more of an implementation level thing. Like, to be cross-functional means you've got the implementation skills. I don't think of sales and marketing team versus a operations team as silos, because the way that they end up there is they're not organizing around how they do stuff. They're organizing around the types of problems. They're organizing around what you need to do and why, as opposed to how you're going to do it.
Okay. If you have a function of sales and marketing, what are they selling and marketing? Actually, it would be marketing and selling. What is it that they would be marketing and selling?
Individual products.
Oh, a product that needs to be developed.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So they are integral. So marketing and sales doesn't live on its own.
Right. But you've got an organization where you don't have enough demand on a specific product to set up a team just to feed that. And so so are you saying we should have like 2-3 people teams, extremely small teams that just focus on this one specific product?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's the easy answer.
Are we not a experimental mindset? Like, what might that look like? What would be viewed as the barrier to doing that?
Yeah, probably the admin overhead, I'm thinking, because you might end up with more teams and then more coordination costs.
Tell me about the admin overhead.
Well, so
Is it
you've got
even needed?
so let's say you've got sales and marketing business function or business domain, and within that there are three little products, right? So you have three little teams within the sales and marketing domain. You've got three little product teams, and then those three product teams are each focused on. They all need data, they all need security, they all need infrastructure, for example. And so if you're the infrastructure team, you have to talk about this team's needs and this team's needs and this team's needs. So now you've got, you're more efficient in the way you've structured the product teams because they're just little three people teams. So that's super efficient. But then how do they, like, you've moved that complexity over to the team level? How do the team of teams coordinate? Does that make sense, or did I?
Do they need to? If there are three separate products and you've got a team on each product, is there a need for the teams to coordinate amongst themselves? And maybe the answer is yes, because of security. You've got some overall security stuff that you need to get rolled out that applies to all three products.
Yes, that's what I would say.
So maybe the coordination layer is around the security. It's around the data coordination. Like you're trying to operate everyone within architectural guardrails or performance guardrails, and that's the team of teams concern that you have. If you had three person teams that each took on the database stuff, the front end stuff, the whatever the other parts are that you got, that could be a 9-person team that is totally cross-functional.
Yeah, this is how I ended up back at the Scrum of Scrums.
Yeah,
sort of.
I'm not saying that's the answer. I'm just saying that you wouldn't be nuts if that was with your situation, right? Yeah. Everyone keeps going, well, we can't possibly build a team with all the different. It's like, well, couldn't you get there? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. What do you think, Jeff?
I think under traditional thinking, yeah, I could see where they would have a mental block with that. Yeah, it's difficult to conceive of, I got to have all these people on this team. And yet we see people and organizations try that. That's why we end up with 35-person teams.
Yeah.
But I think in the current, under a more agile model, you don't have to. It's about, does each individual on the team have capabilities beyond this little bitty? Okay, you're just going to do front end stuff. Okay, you're just going to do UX stuff.
Yeah.
And
then it gets made worse because somebody looks at it and says, well, we don't have a lot of front end work this sprint, so we're going to put more stories that appeal to the front end person into this thing, even though the rest of the stuff doesn't make sense to do this.
Wag the dog.
Yeah. So, and this is one of the reasons of my discomfort with the whole release train concept, because it's a solution looking for a problem, not.
Well, I mean, like if you're building an airplane, I can see it. Like there are certain aspects where it makes sense, but I think a lot of
we don't innovate airplanes too often, right? You do one innovative airplane every once, one product that's an airplane once a year.
We have an airplane guy here.
Well, how many new models of airplanes come out?
No, admittedly, yeah. I mean, you are right. There's going to be a focus on, this is the new model, Gulfstream, whatever, the Gulfstream 700. And so, if the organization, while the organization is still busy, churning out G500s and G600s, that's operational, but then, yes, there's R&D and all the stuff that goes into this G700. Okay, yes, that is the focus
of those groups, but there's still operations team focusing on maintaining the old.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that in itself is a good analogy. So this is what we're looking at here. We're not, so don't use airplanes as too complex to think about as a problem. This is any product plan that you're launching. A new product has complexity to it. Airplanes have more complexity than toasters. But allegedly.
I'll
A
get
little,
on
a little bit, a little bit more.
So
I guess this is why consultants say it depends. It really does depend.
it totally
But we
depends.
have to help them understand how to think about it and how to arrive at the answers, right? That's the thing I want to make sure we've conveyed to people. This is how to get to the solution, as opposed to, well, I don't know.
Right. And I just feel like they come to the table with the silos already firmly in place. And the first question is, how do we make the silos work?
Right.
And if they came to it with the understanding and said, we have the silos now, how do we make the silos work for now? And then what do we need to change to? I think that's the question that we're missing. We get so wrapped around the axle of how to make this thing work, and we solidify it and cement it in this form that, and that's, and I think that's why we get called into so many things that, we've already tried Agile once, twice, 3 times, because we cemented something in place for what we had at the time.
Yeah.
And then it didn't work because it wasn't the right model. We just tried to make it work instead of thinking, how are we going to evolve through this change? How are we going to manage this change? How are we going to evolve this system?
That's one of those things that struck me most about the team topologies book. I mean, a lot of that is sort of, I don't know, it makes sense. But the part that I think I didn't realize before was the idea that the organization needs a way, not just to set up teams and how they relate, but also to notice when that that structure is no longer serving. They talk about a sensing mechanism to tell when you have to move people between teams, or when you have to set up teams or bring them down. So I guess the point that struck me is that you need to be constantly thinking of that. This isn't a big bang. Maybe there's a big bang when you go from the old, like, not thinking about this at all to starting to think about it. There's a big change. But after that, should be slow, continuous evolutionary change in terms of the teams and who's on the teams and how they're structured and how they coordinate to each other. And I don't know if people are thinking about that.
Well, I mean, they're even within SAFe, they tried to bring awareness to it. They said, here, draw the dependency diagram and show all the lines that are dependent. So if you have a bunch of silo teams, you're going to see a lot of threads.
Yeah.
Right. And SAFe gives at the time I paid attention to SAFe gave the direction, you should try to remove some of the threads, or you should try to minimize the threads.
Yeah.
And the way to minimize the threads is to build the teams in which the capability is within the team, instead of having an external reliance.
Right.
And that seems like that was the step that everyone just stopped thinking at. Like, too big, too hard, can't do that.
Yeah. Is that a specific scaled Agile framework approach diagram, like dependency diagram of?
Yeah, it's like, well, you end up in somewhere in the PI planning, you should be having all the initiatives up on the wall.
Oh,
and then
the program board, for sure.
Right. And then any that are dependent on something else. Right. And then you could, so they tend to show it. Well, the ones that we did, they tended not to show it by team. They tended to show it by initiative. But
yeah, but and that's for at the work level for the program. You're talking about the next 3 months and SAFe. But I'm talking about, like, when you start setting up the Agile release train, how do you decide what team should be in there in the first place, and what those team charters should look like? The idea of a dependency diagram is super interesting to me, but I don't know that was always there in terms of analyzing the teams themselves, because that seems like super helpful.
I'm basing this entirely on what I've seen come out of, right, a few PI planning sessions.
Yeah.
So I think it would be important to have that, like, to have the program board that's showing all the dependencies of the initiatives. But also dependencies of the teams of a secondary view that shows that as well.
Yeah.
Because every one of those threads is a potential risk, right? We're trying to lay, PI planning is very boldly saying we're going to lay out a 3-month plan, which is just a smaller waterfall plan. We're executing incrementally, and we're executing in sprints, but we still plan the whole dang thing. And, and I've seen people try to dial that back and say, okay, well, we don't really plan the whole thing. We plan like most of the first sprint because that's just a sprint plan. And then we plan 3/4 of the second sprint and half of the third sprint and a quarter of the fourth sprint, and then nothing in the subsequent sprints because we know there's going to be other things that are going to come up. And then, so what you've done is for the next 3 months, you've only planned a month and a half of work, which immediately sets off the acid indigestion in the product team. Because it's like, well, no, I need way more than that.
Yeah.
Like, well, yeah, we know. But the answer is not to plug in the other month and a half of work into this plan.
Yeah.
Because that plan is imperfect.
Yeah, I like to think of it as when you're engaging in big room planning, PI planning, whatever, if you are too granular in those latter sprints, if you're granular at all, for that matter, then you're just setting yourself up for failure. And it's no different than a team filling up their sprint or iteration with a bunch of stuff, knowing that historically, well, we could only get a fraction of this done.
Yeah.
There's no difference than if you lay out this same thing for a quarter and you're very granular. There's no difference in that. And so where is the value? What are you doing differently now than you were before? Because you're still not delivering, right?
The value might be the illusion of certainty.
Well, yeah, okay.
Well, yeah, so
illusions.
Is there value in illusion?
Well, people certainly spend a lot of time and energy and burn a lot of calories trying to get it.
Well, yeah, but
So
is that an empirical approach? Empirical is based on real observation.
It doesn't seem to, so I don't know. I think that's a profound point. I mean, it doesn't give people what they say that they need, but maybe what they want and what they really want are two different things. You know what I'm saying? Like,
so the illusion may be satisfying, especially upstream, for the moment coming out of PI planning. But then when the reality hits, there's this disillusionment, right? And so then they're unhappy again. And
it's like
you go
Dumb
through
and
this.
Dumber. So you're saying there's a chance. There's and we're betting everything on it.
It is the most annoying sound in the world. So the thing that I've always been struck with coming out of PI planning is I've said this every single time. Like, okay, we just went through all this time to set up a view of the next 3 months that's largely fictional, but whatever. The next sprint is pretty well
Hypothetical.
You should probably look at this every sprint going forward. The product owners, the product managers, this should be a living document. It's like, if you wait until your house is a complete mess, it's a huge task to get it set up again. But just keep sweeping every week after that. And you don't ever get into that hole again. And that's a pattern that doesn't always hold.
No, you're right. They don't spend, I don't see them coming back to that because it was such an onerous task. It was so much, it involved so many people getting them together. And you promised us we would get a plan. So we dedicated the time and now we don't have the time to spend on that. And it's like, no, now you got to maintain it, right? You got to nurture it. You got to work with it and say, all right, the reality is this was our forecast. The reality is different. What does that do to the forecast? And if you look at it and say, well, now it's wrong, and now we're going to crack some skulls, you just broke everything, right? That's not the answer. This is, we went through this to get our best guess at what the outcome was going to be, and we will monitor that, and we will adjust. We will inspect and adapt.
Yeah.
Damn it.
Guess versus contract.
Right? And so we will at the end of the first sprint, what is the reality of the situation? What does that mean for the plan? Do we need to adjust things?
Yeah.
The answer the answer must be yes. Right? And then
I
what
mean-
are those adjustments that are necessary? Whatever. It depends. It
Yeah.
depends on what went wrong.
Yeah, 100%. It's almost like we haven't made clear that there's a feedback cycle that needs to happen quickly. And that, how many times do you want to touch the steering wheel while you're driving down the road? A lot, right? But people aren't looking out the windshield, and they're ending up in the ditch. It's like, well, yeah.
I guess it depends on the kind of car that you're driving, but
Yes,
we won't go there.
How many times do you want to touch the steering wheel? Like, ew, ew, ew. Yucky.
Uh-huh. But Matt, I think what you and Mike are getting to, though, is highlighting that old behaviors, traditional behaviors, are set it and forget it.
Mm.
And so we want to plan something out, and then magically 3 months later, 6 months later, 9 months later, whatever, it's done. And life doesn't work that way.
Right.
And so there's this reticence to keep your hand on the wheel. Yeah, pay attention, because guess what? What you thought today is going to change radically tomorrow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, or it's going to change slightly. And then the next day it's going to change slightly. And it could be so insidious that you don't even notice it. But then by the end of 2 or 3 weeks, like, whoa,
You're in the ditch.
we were off
Yeah.
1 degree just one day. But yeah, one day. And so now you're in the ditch.
Yeah.
And now you
Totally.
get some helpful person sitting in the back seat, grabbing a broom handle and reaching over the seat and trying to run the throttle and the steering wheel for you.
Yeah, that's terrifying. Okay.
Yeah.
Did we solve it?
Did we solve it? Depends.
Okay. Wow.
Speaking of depends.
Oh boy. This feels like it has been some sort of agile thing. Unless you guys have more you want to go into.
And who have you been in this?
I've been mostly Matt Beam. Consistently.
I've been entirely Mike Marchi.
And I'm always Jeff Singleton.
See you next time, people. Thanks for watching.
Bye.